Welcome everyone to Power Dream Sister Helping Sisters annual domestic violence workshop. I am so pleased to have a panel and a patient panel, may I add. I would like to, first of all, just to say it in order, we do have with us this morning, actually, we have Penny Daly. She's a social worker at the Akron Children's Hospital Care Center, Child Protective Services. We have CASA, Gal, Program of Summit County Juvenile Court. We have Beth, Cardina, Program Coordinator. We have David, Siko. He is our domestic violence expert, I want to say. I'm going to say expert because David's been with us for 16 years. And then, of course, we have Nikki Crawford. She's our Education and Outreach Manager for Hope and Healing Survivor Resource Center. Am I correct? Thank you. And, of course, we have Elder George Head. He is our professional self-defense instructor. He has been with us also for 16 years. So thank you, panel. I appreciate you coming out on this wonderful sunny afternoon, but I know we're going to take a lot back with us. Our topic this time, we always focus on different topics of different types of abuse. And this time we are focusing on child abuse. It's something that we have not even addressed 16 years, and we have never done that before. So, David had responded to me in an email, and he said, oh, that would be sort of interesting to see what that's going to bring. And I think it will also. A little bit about Power Dream. We are advocates against domestic violence. We're all about the awareness. We dedicate our time to our teen awareness, regardless of race, color, creed, gender, and we empower our victims by bringing back self-respect educationally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, and mentally. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I am the founding president of Power Dream Sisters Helping Sisters Ministries. I would like to welcome you to our panel, and I'd like to welcome our guest and our guest that's out there watching us. We are so glad that you are tuning in with us today. Even though you cannot be with us, you are with us in spirit, and I appreciate that. Please make sure that you listen closely to our guests and take something back with you today. First of all, we would like to present to you Penny Daly. She's our social worker from the Akron Children's Hospital Care Center Protective Services. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here, and nice, beautiful day, but at least we get some of that sunshine in here. So yeah, I'm Penny Daly. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, she, her pronouns, and I'm currently at Akron Children's Hospital, primarily in our care center, which is a child advocacy center. So we work with kids when there's concerns for abuse or neglect. And I also cover the emergency department. I'm not with Child Protective Services. That's actually a county agency, so that's something separate. That, although they are a part of our multidisciplinary team, I don't represent the Child Protective Services. So I intend for my portion of today's event to be very interactive, so please, the more you participate or as you have questions or feedback, that's really what I intend this to be, is a conversation. I just have some slides to kind of guide some of that. All right. So when we think of child abuse, just throw out some words. What do we think of? What is child abuse? What words come to mind? What pops in our head?
Verbal. Thank you. Physical. Oh, sorry. That's okay. Neglect. Mental. Not reaching.
What was it?
She said not feeding them.
Starvation, huh?
What else do we think of?
Emotional.
Financial. Medical.
big one.
It is a big one.
That's a big one, yep.
What,
This one is something that's kind of, I'd say, a bullying.
Abuse.
Mental. Oh, mental's up there. Oh, okay.
well, that's a big one for sure. What else comes to our mind?
Now, this is a very touchy one, but sexual abuse.
That's the biggest one.
Can't forget that one. Isolation.
Captivity.
Mm. Trafficking.
And actually, I just saw somebody as I was driving up today, coming up Copley Road about ending human trafficking. I don't know if they were part of they had a big sign. So everybody
Okay.
else saw that
Okay.
person. I don't know if they were connected with the agency or not, but yeah, this definitely can be a problem. All right, so all of these words, if we had to think of one word,
Living quarters.
living quarters? Absolutely. Like in poor condition or.
Or housing, right?
So if we had to think of one word that encompasses all of that, what's one word that we could come up with? So I'll throw this one out.
Right. That's what I love.
Hidden.
Oh, yeah.
Because child abuse
Oh,
Yes.
only functions
if it's kept in secret.
if it's kept in secret.
Absolutely. That's the big one.
Because I don't think you can find anyone out there, even people that maybe commit child abuse, that thinks it's a good thing. Or, I mean, as a community, as a population, I think we all agree child abuse isn't okay. It shouldn't be tolerated. It's we all want to stop child abuse, but it only works because it stays hidden. So I encourage you, as we kind of go through some of these slides, or as we're talking today, to acknowledge that child abuse is hidden. Sometimes kids will, and similar, I think there's a lot of parallels to domestic violence or intimate partner violence, but to questioning, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you escape it? Why didn't you tell someone right away? But that's, again, it's hidden. It works because it's hidden. So just believing kids too, that when they are ready to tell, or when somebody observes something, that they, seek help for the kids. Believe in the kids and realizing that kids aren't always ready to tell or talk about it. My little Bart Simpson slide. Side note, my family's really excited. I have 3 kids. And we actually, we lived right here in Maple Valley, and we moved all the way over to Highland Square, so not too far. I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And then with my husband and I, we're like, this is too perfect. We're going to be the Simpsons for Halloween. So
Oh, that's
we're
going to be
very
cute.
excited. We're getting our
Okay.
costumes together. This is just a real basic definition, kind of how the law sees child abuse. Good morning, welcome. It's basically anytime a parent or a caregiver does something to seriously, to physically harm, emotionally harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation of a child. And the law defines a child as somebody under age 18. And then sometimes our local county agency will actually work with kids through high school graduation. All right. So child abuse is a huge problem. Again, these are estimates because we know that child abuse is hidden. We can't just count up the numbers. But the estimates nationwide look at about 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 13 boys are estimated to experience child abuse. So that's all the different types of child abuse that we were talking about. And I'm actually almost certain that number for boys is much higher. But why do you think it's the stats only showed as 1 in 13.
They're too ashamed to tell anyone.
Exactly. Yeah, especially with the sexual abuse. I think even in my time, I've been at Akron Children's for 10 years. I've been in the field for about 18 years. And I've seen that more and more boys are coming forward. And I think when they do come forward, people are more likely to believe them. There can be a lot of stigma attached to sexual abuse. Some people still have the idea that that's somehow linked to their gender identity or their sexual orientation. Abuse is abuse, and kids don't want it, they don't ask for it, that's why it's abuse. But as a society, as a community, sometimes we still have those beliefs. Also with corporal punishment, the law in Ohio doesn't say that corporal punishment's necessarily illegal, but certainly if it caused physical injury to the child, if it's a very young child, they're going to look at it very differently. And it's kind of the idea of, okay, did what this child do is it an okay punishment? Research, and people have lots of different beliefs about corporal punishment. And a lot of that can be very culturally bound, but what the research shows is actually not effective. It doesn't stop kids from misbehaving. If it was that easy, none of our kids would misbehave. But that's some of the numbers, I think, why, and when we're looking at abuse. 1 in 4, that's huge for girls. And so child abuse. It affects every community. It doesn't matter a person's race, it doesn't matter a person's gender, it doesn't matter their ethnic background, if they're rich, if they're poor. But we do know that people that are living in poverty, people that have other social stressors, sometimes it's a lot easier to snap and respond to abuse. What other contributing factors, what pockets of the community do you think that we either see a over-representation or a under-representation when it comes to abuse? And there's really no wrong answers, but any ideas?
Out in the public, like a store or something, the kid wants something, they start crying or whatever, the parent might snatch them up or cuss at them and tell them what they want to do in the midst of everything.
Yeah. And the law probably often those kind of things doesn't always see that as abuse. But what about one common example of kids that are abused? Certainly not everyone in this situation doesn't lead to abuse, but you have a working mom, probably working 2-3 jobs, maybe not especially high paid, has a couple kids at home, but maybe even earns a little bit too much to qualify for a child care assistance. Who's she going to leave the kids with? This is just an example. Oldest kids sometimes, right? Because kids can be abused by kids. What we see a lot of is non-parents, so oftentimes mom's boyfriends, who might be very new to that family's life. And I'm not saying that children left with mom's boyfriends, lots of good boyfriends out there that can provide adequate care, but that person might not have that same parental bond to those kids that another person would, right? And maybe he's not working and needs a place to stay, so we often sometimes will see, especially with the little ones, cases of abuse with the non-parent caretaker. But I do want to reinforce, I'd say underrepresented is maybe people living in rural areas. If you're living in an apartment and you're yelling at your kids and hitting your kids or something's going on, there's eyes and ears around you, right? But if you live out on a farm or something, maybe people aren't paying as close attention and it's not getting reported the same way. I think one other underrepresented group is people that are non-English speakers. I think we have a myth that in some cultures it's okay to abuse kids, and really I've worked with people from many, many different backgrounds. I've worked very closely with our immigrant and refugee communities. There's no culture that says child abuse is okay, as a cultural idea. But sometimes we as outsiders think, well, maybe that's part of their culture. Or also, it's harder for even people from within the culture if they don't have the English skills or the understanding of how our systems works to seek help, right? So I think that's probably underrepresented. We're not seeing as many of those cases.
Don't mean to interrupt, but my understanding from the things that I've heard, especially on the north side, we have more of that going on. My understanding is there's been a lot of abuse, all types of abuse, and because of they're not able to speak, English and be able to communicate, they feel that they have no hope. And there's a lot of fear for them, and their abuser knows that.
Exactly.
And so they use that to their advantage. So now I think they're trying to find ways for them to communicate and for them to trust others so that they can get away from the situation, because the abuser already knows that they can't get away, and know where you're going to go. You don't even know where you're at.
Exactly. That's a perfect example, and especially if the abuser has more English language skills,
right?
They could use that to advantage when the police show up. Oh no, officer, there wasn't any problem. Oh, I can be your translator. And at the hospital, we're actually required by federal law to use trained medical interpreters. So anytime we have a patient there, anytime we have a family there, if they need an interpreter I would say pretty much every single language. I mean, we can connect with indigenous languages. There are interpreters. We use an iPad, and we will speak directly to that parent alone. We'll speak directly to that kid alone. And we do have in-person interpreters, too, for some of our more common language, Nepali, Spanish, Arabic, American Sign Language, Burmese. We have hospital interpreters, but otherwise we have iPads, and they're trained medical interpreters. So,
Okay.
yeah.
The one thing I've noticed about people not wanting children to say anything about what's going on in the home, if you look at the facial expression, like if you're asking a child a question and the child would want to say something, but they look over at the parent and the parent
Right.
it's more for me to understand, it's more intensive to watch the facial and action of expression on the child as well as the parent. Then to me that tells you there's something going on.
Yep, definitely. And so the way it works at Akron Children's is, of course, we're all mandated reporters, social workers, doctors, nurses, pretty much all of our staff are mandated reporters. So if we have concerns, we don't investigate, but we do report to Children's Services and law enforcement. And my role as, when I'm in the emergency department is, some children present because there's concerns for abuse. Maybe they were with mom and then they go to their visit with grandma or with dad or whoever, or the babysitter, and they have concerns. They can bring a child in and say, I'm concerned that something happened. They have this mark on their body or they're acting like this, whatever their concerns are. What we do is I talk one-on-one with the adult first, and then after that I talk one-on-one with the child, and I do look for all those nonverbals as well. Again, that's why we have social work do it, because we're trained to pick up on that. And then when we talk with kids for acute sexual abuse, we actually record those interviews. It's a forensic interview. And we always do it one-on-one. We only talk to the child alone.
Do you ever have any, I've heard a lot of issues that's been in the daycare areas now.
From my experience, there aren't any widespread issues. I would say as in my experience, much fewer, and we do of course get some concerns with daycares. I see much fewer issues with licensed daycares, especially daycare centers, versus, and nothing wrong with, having other people watch your child, but we don't see as much with licensed daycare centers, very few. So I don't believe that to be like a widespread issue. So. So talking a little bit more about who is most at risk, certainly children across any demographic do see abuse. Youngest kids are the most vulnerable. The little kids, especially under age 2. Why do you think the little ones are so vulnerable?
Can't speak.
They can't speak, right?
Mhm.
But also, they do a lot of things that unless unless you're connected to that kid, or you're a trained professional, or you've been around kids, a lot of things, even like they're tough to deal with. When a baby's crying and you just want them to stop, and if you, sometimes that's when we see abuse. Kids that are shaken, kids that are hit, kids that are taken advantage of. So the little ones, they can't speak, they can't tell us what's going on, they're pooping their pants, they're having accidents, they're breaking things. It's, we as adults, as people with healthy relationships with kids, we know that's just where kids are at developmentally. But we do see those children as the most vulnerable. Again, girls, especially, they do see slightly higher rates of sexual abuse. American Indian or Alaskan Native kids, again, these are marginalized populations. And then we also do see high rates of victimization amongst African American children as well. And then socially and medically marginalized children. So we see a lot of kids with the speech delays, even if they're older, kids with autism, kids with other medical needs. These are kids that are harder for any person to take care of, but especially maybe if you don't have all those supports in place, or you're going from job to job, or you're just trying to get food on your table, you're feeling extra stressed. Those are the kids that are extra hard to take care of. And then also LGBTQIA, so our lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans kids, gender non-conforming kids. Parents and caregivers aren't always as supportive. And then we see a lot of similar almost to how you described with the immigrant community, where, oh, nobody's going to help you, you can't speak English, you won't know the system. Similar, oh, no one's going to believe you if you tell I'm going to out your gender identity or your sexual identity. So there's a lot wrapped up in that as well. And also sometimes, especially with the LGBT kids, those kids also face really high rates of homelessness. So if they're staying on a friend's couch, or they're in a shelter, or they're moving from place to place, that just makes those kids that much more vulnerable to abuse. So this talks about abuse in general, including neglect, which neglect is the highest rates of abuse that we see. So parents not meeting their kids' need, and it's not simply being poor. Being poor isn't neglect, because if you're able to utilize resources, you can live in a shelter. That's not neglect. You can go to the pantry. You can go to the church kitchen. Meeting your kids' needs, that's not neglect, but it's the big one that we see is truancy issues, which I know, especially with the teens, is a struggle. But as a parent, you're responsible for getting your kids to school. You're responsible for getting your kids their medical care. Now, it's a parent's choice if you want to get vaccines. It's a parent's choice if you want to take your kids for their well checks. But if you have a kid with high-risk asthma, and you're not taking them into their appointments, and they're in the ER every other week, and the resources are out there, and you're just not following them, and it's causing your kid to be sicker. That's where the problems are. Diabetes, I've seen ones where it's a 7-year-old, and the parent's like, oh, I told them to do their insulin, and a 7-year-old can't be responsible for that. And really, I think, at least what I see at Akron Children's, the doctors want to work with families. You, as a parent, as the caregiver, that's who knows the kids the best. We want to give you all those tools. It's not like the second an appointment's missed, we're calling children's services, but if we're seeing a pattern, or we're seeing a kid that due to not getting whatever medical care they needed, that it made the kid's condition deteriorate, that's when we'll involve children's services. So parents are the bigger offenders, and that's hard to hear because, like, you know, parents are the ones that are supposed to be there for their kids, but other relatives, and then what I talked about earlier, especially an unmarried partner, somebody that's really not always invested in the kid, might be newer to the kid's circumstance. I mean, unfortunately, we do even see situations where, from what I see, it's often a male partner, so oftentimes mom's boyfriend will seek out relationships where there's a 12-year-old daughter or there's a 9-year-old son for sexual abuse. We'll see it, you know, that when you look back, he's actually abused multiple partners, children. And then other non-relatives, it could be, really we're talking when it comes to child abuse, it's anybody that's in a position of power. So if your kid, you know, you walk down the street and a random person jumps them, that's not necessarily, that's a physical assault, also not okay, but that's not child abuse. We're talking about a caregiver or somebody that has some kind of power over the child, a coach, a teacher, a daycare worker, anybody like that. Babysitter. So we talked a little bit, I said neglect's the most common type of abuse, and oftentimes these aren't in isolation. So kids that are neglected are more likely to also be physically abused or sexually abused. So neglect in terms of abuse, and then physical abuse, sexual abuse. Sex trafficking, it is a really big issue. It's kind of its own piece, and I think right now even what we know is really the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the trafficking that we're seeing isn't in person. It's online, or at least it starts off online. And that to me is really, really scary because a lot of parents, you know, they're doing everything they can to protect their child, but their child's like this, right there at the dinner table, right there playing Roblox. Roblox is a really bad one. Snapchat's a really bad one. I always tell parents it's not if, but when your child's going to be exposed to pornography. Now, pornography itself isn't sex trafficking, but often that's how things get started. So that could be your conference for next year, sex trafficking. But a lot of what we're seeing, and it still is trafficking, it still is, you know, it still is child sex abuse, but it's online, or at least it starts off online. Even a lot of the teens that are sexually assaulted, they will, a lot of times they're initially meeting somebody online and then kind of willingly going to meet them, and then things take a turn.
Are you trying to talk? Was somebody else saying something?
Oh.
Go ahead.
There was a time where I literally saw a young man say and do in school. I was, you know, walking and everything, and next thing I know, he grabbed this girl by her hair and drug her all the way down the hallway.
At school.
At school. And this one other young man said, "These girls are my bees." I'm like looking, and I'm like, I told him, I said, "Let's go over here. Let it go. I'm not moving until you let her go." Then there was a time where this other young man cornered a young lady in the corner, was just rotting off all this stuff to her, and I just stood there. And he looked at me, he said, "What do you want, B?" I said, "You know what, when you look in the mirror, that's who you're talking to, because you're not talking to me. Let her go. Let her go to her class."
I'm glad you were there to intervene.
So it's happening in the schools itself.
Yeah. And even the language that he used against her, it was to make her feel less.
Yes.
That she was, essentially he thought of her as a
And the way these young girls are now presenting their bodies out here, it's like they think it's for the style thing, but it's more or less for attention from guys and teachers and other boys. And when they get caught up in this stuff, they don't know how to get away from it. You know, I seen this one young lady one day coming down Vernoden, and she had on some kind of revealing outfit. And it bothered me when I saw her, and I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. So I pulled to the side. I asked her, I said, do you know why you got that outfit on? She said, oh, it's because of the style. No, baby, that's not because of the style. There's more to it than what you think it is. I said, if a man saw you driving, he would literally stop and talk to you and say anything he wanted to say to you. You would believe him. You would get in the car with him, trusting that he's going to do what he said he's going to do, but it's something hidden behind all that.
Yeah.
You know. And one more thing, and I saw one downtown some years ago. I got off the bus, and I was crossing the street, and this dude saw this young lady crossing the street. She looked like she was kind of not like confused, but she didn't know which bus to take. And I happened to cross the street, and this dude just looked at me and started checking her up like this. And I stopped and looked at him. I said, you got a problem? He said, no, I don't. I said, so why don't you go about your way? Well, I'm looking at her, I'm checking her out. I said, not with me, you aren't. So I had that young lady ride the buses with me. I sat next to her just so she can get where she had to go. You know,
I wish you could trail behind all of our teens, because it really does. It takes those responsible adults to jump in, and you know, unfortunately, there's not always going to be someone trailing behind them. And I'll never blame somebody that's being victimized, you know, for how they dress or, you know, how they present themselves. And at the same time, I think that there are some steps people can take to make themselves safer, to put themselves in less compromising positions. I think the clothing piece is complicated, but I'm glad you were able to jump in, at least help out in those situations.
yeah, because I mean, I wouldn't want it to happen to my child.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are fearful about stepping in.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
I would be thankful if you jumped in for my kid.
That's
So
right.
that's what we need.
That's
what
right.
the community's
Absolutely.
about.
I'm finding more and more, because I was a foster parent for over 20 plus years.
Okay.
Plus, I went to
Thank you.
school. I went to school for that too, community service social work, 2 year. But I'm finding in the foster care system, it's another form of pimping.
Yes.
I mean, it's another form of trafficking out our children, because anybody can look on the World Wide Web, and that happened to one of my children that I had this young man over 2.5 years, almost 3 years, and all this man comes up to clear blue sky, seen him on the World Wide Web, had a book made of him, never spoke to him, never talked to him, never seen nothing but a picture, never no communication, and I felt like I was his mother because I was his protector for the last 2.5 years, trying to get all the pieces together from all the abuse that he went through. And then you're going to tell me, from the caseworkers told me to step back, stay out of it, because they allowed this man to come to town, never met the kid, never talked to the kid, never no interaction period. And this kid of mine, that was my child, had to stay in a hotel room with this man who came from out of state, of whom he didn't know, of whom was a stranger.
I haven't heard specifically about that.
I had an argument with the caseworker about that, and I told her in her face, I said, if you're uncomfortable, you can call me. I said, how come they can't have a conjoined room, and then when he feel comfortable, he can unlock the other part of the door?
Sure.
They made this kid stay. Even the book was eerie that he had made of him, because I'll never forget, like 2 passages in the book, and the boy's name I won't say, but it had said, by the way, in German, your name means hunter. Your hunt is over. You're found. Another creepy. I was raised with a lot of love, and I want to give a lot of love to a young man. Quote his name. All in the book. Pictures that he got from the World Wide Web. And that young man Never asked me what the kid liked, what he don't like, what kind of kid is he. Never no interaction. He was nervous because he was so afraid that the kid was too attached to us.
Okay.
Well, almost 2.5 years later, of course he should be attached to a certain degree. But he wasn't, after a while, he wasn't feeling comfortable. The caseworker kind of pushed him on out the door, took him to another state, and this boy ended up getting mistreated. A whole lot of stuff just was eerie.
Well, that's rough to hear.
And, oh yeah, it was all,
Yeah,
but
I haven't heard specifically
Oh,
that,
honey.
but kids in foster care are at increased risk.
they're definitely increased because they're considered your throwaways.
Yes.
They're considered your John, a lot of times those are your Jane Does and John Does because nobody really takes an interest too much and don't even care.
And then sometimes people don't believe them.
Yeah, they don't, and they don't care. I know a young lady today, drugs, terrible drugs, not due to you took her from her parents because they were on drugs, and you placed her in a foster home where granddaddy's waking up on top of the little 6-year-old every morning. So, this is what we're talking about.
Thank you for stepping in as a foster parent.
Yeah.
You mentioned Roblox. What about Roblox?
So they can have communication, essentially like text messaging with other people. And we're seeing a lot of kids are meeting adults that often sometimes present themselves as adults and sometimes present themselves as another kid. And then they'll communicate through Roblox, and then they'll share other ways to communicate through just other internet channels. Yeah, it's Roblox is a big problem right now. Roblox and Snapchat.
Wow.
I don't know Roblox.
Yep. Yeah, because it seems like just a fun game. I mean,
Yeah.
little ones play it, but it can be. There are ways to set it so that you can't directly communicate, or that I think you can just like do it like on airplane mode, so you're not communicating with other people. But it can be dangerous. We running short. Okay, let me just. Sorry, I knew that it was going to lead to some.
Okay.
So there's just one more slide. I'll go ahead and share. Okay, this one, I'm kind of breeze through it. Obviously, it's a child abuse is a complicated and complex issue. So this is one thing I did want to pull up. This goes over the age of consent in Ohio. So this is somebody who can say, yes, I'm okay with sex. Yes, I want to have sex. 13. So a kid who's 13, by law, and every family has, different things that they teach their kids, or different morals, things that they're okay with. Developmentally, is it okay for a 13-year-old to have sex? Probably not. But this is the way the law sees it. A kid who's 13 can consent, can say, yes, I want to have sex, any kind of sex with anybody that's 13 to 17. And I bring that up because it's important, if your kids, your grandkids, if they are sexually active or you think they might be, do seek out medical care for them. We have adolescent medicine at Akron Children's. We're non-judgmental. We want to give people, and certainly not all 13-year-olds are having sex, but we just encourage you to make sure that the kids do have access to health care so that they can make healthy decisions around that. So anyone that's 13 through 17 can consent to sex. So certainly then what you were describing, anything being forceful, non-consensual, somebody not being okay with it is different. Once somebody's 16 in Ohio, they can have sex with anybody 13 and up. They can have sex with an 80-year-old if it's consensual. I'm not saying, again, developmentally it's okay, and again, you can have your own expectations for your family, but sometimes we do have parents saying, well, he was having sex with a 40-year-old man. Is it okay? Probably not, but the law, there's nothing illegal about it unless it was a person of power, so a family member, a coach, a teacher, a police officer, a social worker. P. Diddy. No, the law probably wouldn't see that as somebody in power. So I just want to point that out, just because sometimes we get feedback, and I think it's difficult to understand the law in that way.
Well, was it Simone Biles, I think,
Mm-hmm.
had mentioned that her coach was sexually abusing.
So that's,
You're right,
yeah,
right.
coach
Yeah.
would be a
Yeah.
position of power. So anybody under 18 couldn't consent to sex with a coach, with a teacher, with a mentor, with anybody that's meant to be, anyone that's a position of power. And then even within like USA Gymnastics or the governing body, they probably have their own rules, you know, in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So.
I have a question. As voters, how do we know, or do we know who we put in office if we pass these type of laws?
That
That's a
part.
good question.
That part.
Our legislation, our
What's
state.
wrong with the judges, the attorneys, and whatnot to allow to have
Yes.
these laws
Talk about it.
established?
Yeah. But then we do have to think about developmentally where 13-year-olds are at, and would a law stop anybody from having sex? Probably not. So it's complicated.
But I noticed that even with the P. Diddy's and all this, but socially, economically, these people are all, a lot of them are high grade positions, or like you said, those positions. That's why Chris Hansen, from what I understand, To Catch a Predator,
Yeah,
a lot
so
of that became where they kind of put it on hush mode because they were catching too many priests,
Yeah.
lawyers, judges, councilmen, detectives, and all the
And
powers
all
to
those
be.
are position of power. So they're
But
just
all
somebody-
those powers to be.
And the other thing too, in terms of trafficking, is if somebody's under 18, you can't give them anything in exchange for sex. Now, if two teenagers having sex and they buy them birthday gift something, that's okay. But you can't say, "Oh, I'm gonna pay your phone bill," and imply that then you give me sex, or you can't. I'm gonna get your nails done. I'm gonna get your hair done. I'm gonna get you clothes. I'm gonna give you rides. You can't exchange any money, goods, drugs, alcohol in exchange for sex. And then, the other thing is with anybody under 18, you can't film, video, photos, anything like that, any kind of sexual acts or nude images. And interestingly enough, a lot of times, even when I interview kids, it's not as simple as a kid disclosing, I was raped, this is what happens, they go arrest the person. Because unfortunately, the way our law works is unless there's a second side of either evidence or witnesses, or oftentimes they can't actually
What
prosecute.
about Facebook and all that kind of
But
stuff?
when they have pictures, videos, text messages, sometimes they actually get more charges for that than the actual act that happened. So I hate that it's happening, but sometimes in terms of, and I was talking about the multidisciplinary team, we work with police, we work with children's services. If they can get those videos, if they can get those photos,
Right.
if they can get those images, sometimes that's what gets them the charges. So, anyways, I'm sorry I don't have more time. There's a
Thank
lot
you.
to talk about. Feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, I cover our care center and I cover our emergency department. So, thank you.
Thank you.
We learned a lot today, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I know you had, where'd you go?
Back here.
But I know we had even more, am I correct? You had even
Yeah,
more,
there
didn't
was
you?
I know you said 20 minutes, but I was like, well, maybe they won't talk. But I appreciate all your participation because that's what I wanted it to be, was a
Well,
conversation.
thank you, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry I can't stay for all the other presenters.
You're
Good luck.
fine. Thank
You
you.
gotta finish target time.
Next, we have CASA. I'm not sure how we say this, Beth, but is it CASA? It says CASA/GAL. Is that the way it is?
CASA/GAL.
Oh, CASA/GAL. And it's a program from the Summit County Juvenile Court. And Beth is the program coordinator. And I was glad that the first person that when I called to get her to get somebody to represent CASA, I was glad that she was the first one to answer the phone. And so, but Power Team is interested, so we will be attentively listening.
Okay.
Because we had thought about that many years ago. But I think maybe it'd be nice to maybe do something with you guys.
Okay, perfect.
So,
Okay.
welcome back.
All right, thank you. Okay, good afternoon. Again, my name is Beth Cardina. I'm the program coordinator for the CASA Guardian Ad Litem program through Summit County Juvenile Court. So CASA, it's an acronym for Court Appointed Special Advocates. So these are trained community volunteers who serve as guardian ad litems for abused and neglected kids. So a lot of the kids that Penny was speaking about, those are our kids. My background is also in social work. I'm a licensed social worker. I actually started at Summit County Children's Services in 1988 as a frontline social worker doing assessments of child abuse and neglect. Moved into what they call ongoing and protective. I also spent about 10 years in foster care and adoption doing foster care assessments. I do foster parent training. I finished up at Summit County Children's Services about 17 years ago in their community ed department, and I did a lot of community ed training, primarily surrounding the mandated reporting law. Jumped ship again about 17 years ago and landed at CASA. So all of the kids that we serve, and we serve kids from birth, and it can be all the way up to the age of 21. Like Penny said, sometimes Children's Services can keep custody of kids if they're in high school or they have some sort of developmental delay or developmental disability. So what happens is when Children's Services receives an allegation of child abuse and neglect and they go out to do that assessment, if a child is found to be abused or neglected by law, in the state of Ohio, they have to have a guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem does not have to be an attorney. That's not what's written in statute. It just says they have to have a guardian ad litem. So in Summit County, we use CASAs, which are guardian ad litems. And so what the CASA does is they advocate for the child's best interest. So we serve newborn babies, directly from the hospital who maybe have experienced drugs in utero, and again, Children's Services has been called, and a guardian ad litem, CASA, will be assigned to that case. And what they do is they stay with that child, and again, it can be all the way up to the age of 21, ensuring that all their needs are met. So even though they're not like a foster parent where kids are living with them, they step into the role of what a parent should be doing, right? Advocating for their medical needs, advocating for their psychological needs, making sure they're going to their counseling appointments. So they come alongside that child and help to ensure all those services are provided. It's an advocacy role, so again, they're meeting with a lot of different service providers, but they actually go to court and make recommendations. So they're the only person in the court who's representing the child, right? When parents become involved with Children's Services, they have an attorney, and if they can't afford an attorney is provided, right? And their role is to advocate for that parent to get that child returned back to them. And that's through, again, kind of their private attorney. Children's Services has a prosecutor, that's their attorney, they're advocating for what they want. And again, the only one left without a voice is that child, right? And so that is where CASA comes in, and they stay involved with the case until the case is closed at Children's Services, which means in some of our instances, we can close a case in about 11 months. Other times, it's years, because not all kids are able to go home and not all kids get adopted. So we have some of our CASA volunteers who have been with kids 13, 14 years and have been the only consistent figure in that child's life. So it's different than like a big brother, big sister role. Like our CASA guardian ad litems can't transport kids, but they have to see them monthly. And the difficulty that we're running into, and this is probably no secret, is that there are so many kids in foster care right now. I can't even tell you. I mean, there are so many kids in foster care. And the difficulty we're having is we don't have enough local foster homes, so our kids are being placed throughout the state of Ohio, and in some instances out of the state. And so again, if our CASAs are supposed to see their CASA kids once a month, we've had CASAs drive them to Marietta or to Pittsburgh or to Indiana, because again, there's no place for our kids to go. Cuyahoga County right now is in a crisis mode. I mean, Summit County is too, but Cuyahoga County is where kids are spending the night at Children's Services in cubicles, and there's no place to put these kids. And so that puts our kids at risk, right? I mean, there was an incident in Cuyahoga County where you can't detain kids, so they had and these typically tend to be older kids. So they had older kids staying at Children's Services, and I don't know if you are familiar with where that is. It's right downtown, the Jane Edna building. And so these kids were leaving the center, right, and going out on the street. And you talk about kids who are at risk of being trafficked. This is that vulnerable population. So we don't know what the answer is, because again, kids are just they're coming into care and they're staying in care longer, which means if I'm a foster parent and I have space for 3 kids and I already have 3 kids, I might have those kids for 3 years, right? So it prevents other kids from coming into
Right.
the home. So we serve as that like safety net, right? To again, look for those red flags that sometimes maybe teachers are missing, or even a foster parent, because this is that one-on-one relationship where our kids are developing, with a trusted adult. So we're always looking for additional volunteers. If you do decide, like next year, to do a conference on human trafficking, the juvenile court has what they call the specialized court docket, and it is geared towards youth who either are trafficked or are at risk of being trafficked. And any youth that, again, is involved in foster care is at risk, but also kids who are involved on the detention side. What we have seen, our kids are getting arrested for stealing, robbery, or something along those lines, and then when they start to, get more involved in that case, they're finding out that their trafficker has asked them to do these things, right? And so they're not necessarily, they don't want to charge them with theft, right? If this has been a situation where somebody has had some sort of power and control over them. So we're really trying to do a better job in educating people, because many times with our youth that are trafficked, again, Penny alluded to this, but people think it's like that movie Taken, right, where somebody's in a white van and they just snatch a kid off the street. That's not what this looks like. A lot of, especially the girls that we work with, see their person who's trafficking them as their boyfriend. So they don't see themselves as a victim. They even said, I wanted to do this, I agreed to this, but this is a position of power, and control. So those are the kids that we work with too. The majority of the kids, again, it's neglect that we tend to see, substance abuse issues. It's the number one reason why kids are coming into care, and it's gone from we kind of bounced back and forth between, it was a lot of meth at one time, then it went to heroin, now we're back to heroin, we're also seeing a lot of cocaine, and again, with the families that we work with, very rarely is it one drug of choice. You have parents who are also drinking alcohol, and we're concerned now that marijuana is legal. And I can't get into all of that, but again, it's legal, but are you still able to care for your babies, right? If you're using, even though it's legal, are you able to make sure that your kids' needs are being met? So it's very complicated. This is in our own backyard. I always say you don't have to go very far to help a child in need. We serve between 800 and 1,100 kids every year, just in Summit County. Children's Services, they serve, this statistic just blows me away. They serve 1 in 12 kids in Summit County. 1 in 12 kids. So if you are thinking of a classroom of 24 kids, they come in contact with 2 of them in a year. So again, it's a lot. And I've been doing this for a really long time. We have never been at this crisis point in terms of the number of kids coming into care.
I like what you said about the different types of drugs. In the era that I grew up in, and probably you too, we knew who was the druggies, and we usually put them. They usually had their choice. You knew who drank, you knew who smoked marijuana, you knew who did heroin, you knew who did cocaine. Now they're across the board. They're doing it all.
Yeah.
They're doing the pills. They're doing the lean. They're doing the everything.
Yeah.
The marijuana. They're just doing it all. And this is where a lot of these kids are coming up more damaged by birth, damaged before birth. And it's becoming sicker and sicker the way these kids are being born.
Well, and the difficulty too, I think Children's Services runs into is that when kids come into care, Children's Services typically only knows what brought that child to the attention right now.
Right.
And what we talk about with our volunteers is just assume this kid's experienced more trauma than that, right? Like this is what brought them to the attention. But some of that trauma starts in utero, because if I'm a parent and I'm using substances, that can cross into the baby, right? But also the stress hormone cortisol. So if you have a mom who's living in a highly stressful situation, like domestic violence, right, where her stress level is really high, that cortisol crosses over the placenta into the baby. So you have babies that are born stressed, into this environment, because that's the way that they've been living for, their 8 or 9 months in utero. so again, you know, we don't always know all the trauma that our kids have experienced, but we know that they've seen a lot. You know, witnessing domestic violence is a big issue for some of our kids. You know, some of our kids may not want to go to school because they're concerned about, if I leave, you know, my mom home alone, what's going to happen to her? Is she going to be there when I come back? So that protective factor is there. But again, you know, the majority of the kids, it's neglect, but it's so much more, and that's why we really need people to sort of step up to the plate and say, you know, I'm going to walk alongside this child. It's super confusing to kids coming into care, right? I mean, you know, you're a foster parent, you know, and again, we need a lot more of them, but they're strangers to our kids, right? And so what do we tell kids about strangers? Don't talk to them. Don't go in their house. But then they come into foster care and, here, go live with these people.
Strangers.
Yeah, they've had 33 hours of training, you know, that'll help, right? And they have to go to a new school, and so, you know, their behaviors get really, really wonky, and because of that trauma, some of the typical behavior management techniques that maybe we were raised with don't work with our kids, and they get labeled being bad kids. Really, it's a response to their environment.
I don't know if anybody remembers that movie with Halle Berry, when she lost her child in the trash can.
Losing Isaiah.
Yes.
Excuse me?
Losing Isaiah.
Yeah, losing Isaiah. Okay, so, the court case that they had in there, I remember them, and this stuck with me for some reason for a long time. They were talking about the use of crack cocaine in a woman who's pregnant. Once she has that baby, apparently that crack cocaine kills that nurturing hormone that mothers have. Because I know our mothers will protect you like a lioness. I mean, kids go running to their moms, but what they was talking about in that movie was that kills the nurturing protective hormone in mothers. And that's why some mothers are so quick to give their babies up, or so quick to turn them over to drug dealers or whatever. And that's really sad because, you know, we need that nurturing protective hormone from our parents. Because I know my mom would go to bat for all her kids.
That's right.
But you see a lot of these young women nowadays, they're on that drug, and then people like us, we have to deal with that baby 20 years later. 'Cause I'm seeing that a lot.
Yes.
Uncontrollable, they don't want to listen, they're defiant, they want to fight. Because I work right at Lawton, and I have to deal with them on a regular basis. We have to deal with these kids differently than our parents dealt with us.
Yeah,
You have to
absolutely.
reason with them, where when we were growing up, you just didn't do it. You sit down and be quiet. Now you kind of have to explain to these kids why, because their frontal lobes are so jacked up from the drug that they just can't make rational decisions.
And that's
why
an
it's so
excellent
uncomfortable.
point. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
when kids are, you know, when babies are born, and I don't want to get into all this
Right.
brain development because I'm not a neurologist, but you know, they talk about brain development and how like the bottom part of the brain is really developed at birth. It controls, you know, your breathing and your heart rate and all of that, and then it moves to the emotional kind of part of the brain, that's where kids learn like self-regulation, right, and trust and attachment and initiative, and those are what we call relationship-based, meaning they can't learn that unless an adult has given that to them. And when you talk about neglect, really what Penny said is somebody's not meeting their most basic needs. And so we know that for a lot of kids, this is starting really early, that when they cry, they're not being fed on a regular basis, or their diaper isn't being changed, or somebody that they don't know comes in, and instead of picking them up and feeding them, maybe they, you know, kind of roughly handle them, or they prop a bottle, or they shake the crib. So really early on, our babies aren't learning how to attach to other people. And for me anyways, I think that ties into a lot of empathy, right? Like when when your little one gets hurt, you're like, oh, you know, I'm sorry that happened, you're gonna be okay, right? You show them empathy. At a young age, I don't think our kids are getting empathy, so it's really hard for them to show it, right? Like, so when our kids that we work with, let me back up. If you had a kid who was raised in an environment where it was nurturing and loving and there was a healthy attachment, if I went to school and I forgot my lunch, right? I'm gonna sit next to a kid and I'm gonna say to my friend, I forgot my lunch, can I have half your sandwich and some of your pretzels? And this kid's probably gonna be like, fine, right? Our kids, they forget their lunch and they go into the lunchroom. What do? Do they ask nicely for this lunch? No, what do? They take it, right? And if you
Snatch
don't
it.
give it to me, I'm going to beat you up,
Survival
right?
of the fittest.
And so what we tend to do
Right,
is,
right.
they just take it. And what we tend to do is, well, how do you think that made Joey feel?
Right.
And what do our kids say?
I don't care.
I don't care. I was hungry. What was I supposed to do? Right? Because at a very early age too, our kids are learning, I have to fend for myself. right? And I don't need you, by the way, because I've been doing this forever. And so just, I don't care how other people feel, because I have to take care of myself. I've never had anybody step in, protect me, care for me, love me unconditionally, so I'm on my own, right? So that's a really scary place for people to be in, I think. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's survival.
That is
And
survival.
It's me or you. And they don't care because nobody cared about them, so why should they
Why
care
should
about
they
you?
care about other people? And then you get the flip side, though,
Right.
with some, and again, I don't want to be stereotypical, but tends to be females,
Yes.
where they haven't had that. So the first person who comes along and says that they're pretty, right, or cute, bam,
Yeah. Too
right?
quick.
And then they get taken advantage of because they've never had that.
Right.
But we're really talking the Darwin theory.
Yeah, the survival of the fittest.
So we're just going all the way back.
Right, it's primitive, right? It's ingrained
Absolutely.
in you. It's totally, but
And-
3-year-olds should not
Right.
be responsible for taking care of themselves.
But we've seen it.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
seen it
Oh.
where the mom leaves, or you can kind of tell which child was a parent figure.
Yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
know, where the mom is not doing her job and you steady pumping out more and more babies, and then the oldest child or the children have to start taking care of the babies, and some of them be little toddlers and babies
Right.
themselves.
And then the parent gets mad because they're not doing a good
Right,
job.
right.
They should know better, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And they groom these girls too.
And boys.
They
Oh,
definitely groom.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, and boys too.
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. The majority, and she kind of alluded to it, the majority of the child sexual abuse is done by somebody the child knows.
Absolutely.
It's a
Right,
relationship.
right.
Again, it's not the stranger danger, even though we shouldn't encourage
Right.
kids to do that either. But it's,
Generally.
and that's why, again, Penny kind of alluded to it, that if a child does tell someone, I think one of the first things that we can ask them is why they hadn't told anybody else, right? I'm telling you right now, that's the important thing, right? They didn't feel safe enough to
Right.
tell someone else.
Right.
You should be
They
kind of
trusted you.
complimented that they're confiding in you, right? And some of our kids don't know that this is wrong.
No.
They've been raised in this, right? And some of our parents will say to kids, if you tell, you're gonna go to foster care. You wanna go to foster care? I don't know any kid who goes, foster care, yay, sign me up. Or, daddy's gonna go to prison, or mommy's gonna lose the house, or, and can those things happen? 100% they can
But
happen.
we know typically that child listens to that mother.
Oh, yeah.
Usually
For sure.
she's the stronghold. Sometimes that father, if he's running his house with a stern fist, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But yeah, them kids, they'll cross all barriers. A lot of times they'll tell the daddy a lie because mother told them to.
For sure.
Because mother seems to have that,
You also gotta be aware of the thing, it's not a new thing and none of this is new, but
Nothing new under the
incest
sun.
starts inside the home.
Yeah.
You got fathers laying with their daughters, you got uncles laying with their nieces
And uncles laying with their nephews
and
and trying
nephews,
to.
so it's a big issue.
And I mean, let's be honest, it's always been there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember growing up in our neighborhood, and there was a family
Yes.
that, my parents said, just don't go in that, go to that house. I mean, looking back, I'm like, that's what was happening.
Right.
But you didn't talk about it. You didn't,
Right.
what happens in our family stays in our family, and don't you air our dirty laundry, right?
I was
So,
just watching on this show called Crime, where the lady had married this guy. She had 2 kids, and when she was gone, he would mess with the little boy. And the little girl saw that was going on, and she tried to tell her mother, but her mother wouldn't listen. So as they grew up, he killed the mother
Yep.
and took the children, moved away,
Mm.
and abused the boy more than he did the girl. But usually he beat the girl too. But overall, it took them years to find him, but they did find him, and put him away for it. But it's just the fact that we as women don't think about doing background checks on these men.
right.
Because
But they've
like
been
you
stalking
said-
you out.
Right, it's
They know
what
who
they
they're
say
going
to
with,
us
yeah.
that
Right.
makes us believe their words. Because we're needing love just well.
Sure.
And so by we doing that, we have our confidence in these guys, thinking they're going to help me out, they're going to care for me and my children, they're going to do this and do that, but it's all another underlying situation going on.
And that's such an excellent point, because I do think that sometimes people forget that when someone it gets them involved in a relationship where someone is doing something to their child, it's almost like that can't be happening because I would know that. I
Right.
wouldn't pick somebody like that
Yeah.
that would do those things to my child. So there's that whole sense of denial that sometimes goes along. And it's, there's been studies done where sometimes men, and I don't mean to be stereotypical, because females sexually abuse kids too,
Yeah.
it happens. And it's more guys in like child rearing, so like bathing and comforting, I'm using quotes. But, again, when we're looking at the cases that we work with, a lot of this is based on secrets. Right, so one of the things we talk to our kids about is the difference between secrecy and privacy, right? Like, we don't keep secrets. What happened to you can be private, right? Like, not everybody needs to know, but it's not a secret. You should, we actually come up with a list of like who would need that information to
And this
share.
is why a lot of these kids or men themselves or women themselves target other people into going into that situation because they're being abused themselves.
Yes,
Right,
yes,
right.
exactly.
Makes
And
sense.
kind of looking at kids who are vulnerable, again, Penny mentioned it, kids in care are vulnerable, because unfortunately, we've had kids who've been sexually abused by foster parents and adopted parents.
Right,
And
right,
if you
right.
wanna pick a vulnerable population, especially some of our older kids who are labeled as being bad, or they lie, or they steal, and it
Those are the
happens,
kids you're
right,
on
where somebody
target.
told these kids, who's gonna believe you?
They want others to hurt as much as they hurt.
Hurt
Yes.
people, hurt
Right,
people.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yep, and that's what they say, like, if I've experienced it, why shouldn't you?
Did anyone see where these two young men, I think they killed their parents,
Oh,
and they received like 30-some years in prison?
Menendez.
Did you,
The
the Mendez,
Menendez
yes,
brothers.
yes.
Yes, yes.
I thought, and evidence is coming out
Yeah.
now, and that's a perfect example.
I think if that happened now, that would have turned out totally different.
Right, right,
If they knew what
exactly.
they know now,
Exactly,
But they're reviewing the case again now.
right.
They are reviewing the case
Uh-huh,
again.
Yeah,
and they have some evidence.
yeah. But I have some brochures up there.
Thank you.
So the difference with this, though, just so people are aware, people can't request a CASA. It's appointed through the court. And again, it's just with kids who are involved with children's services, so, which nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be involved. So there's more brochures up there, and I can hang around for a little bit and the next speaker goes and
Okay.
whatever.
Okay. Thank you so much, Beth.
You're welcome.
I hope that our paths will be crossed.
I do too. Let me know.
Yes, yes.
You can tell.
We don't have, some of our Poverty Dream team is not here today, some of them for other obligations, but hopefully you'll be able to make the rest of them.
For sure.
We are going to prepare for lunch, but while they're preparing for lunch, we are going to listen to our expert, David Siko. And David's a great guy, and he's been with us through everything that we've done, and so we've come a long way, haven't we?
We have.
Yes, yes, yes. No, welcome, David.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that long. Yeah, 2029, man, I am out of here like a shot. That's my retirement year. Again, I'm Dave Siko. I work for the county courts. So as I always say, if I say anything that is wise, intelligent, and insightful, it's a reflection of my court and my judge. And if I say anything stupid and apocryphal, it's what goes on in my head. Kelly Anderson, who now is running the courts, the domestic violence court, couldn't be here this year. She sends her regrets not being able to be here to talk about the court a little bit more. I had a laugh, like when I got Brenda's thing about, we always agreed that don't do this to the courts. I just sort of list myself as a domestic violence expert, and I got out of after more than a dozen years of doing domestic violence work, I have switched sort of positions in what I do, and I felt, and I saw that, it's like, I'm not, the stuff was not coming off the top of my head the way it was for all those years when I'm mixed into. I had to go back to some of my books and take a look around and see what I had to say, especially about this part of domestic violence, because I work with adults, and so I spend a lot of time working with the men and and women involved with this, and my work with the children is more of a, how did I help men become better parents as part of all the work that we do with them to try to break the cycles of abuse. I was thinking about this, Penny had mentioned, there's the corporal punishment and stuff, and I go back a long time to when I was first raising my kids, and my first son was very, he cried a lot, and him and I struggled. And I spanked him probably more, grew up as a kid in the 60s, we got spanked, no big deal, I spanked him more than I would have probably thought. And the one day my middle one comes along, and I raised my hand to spank him, and I watched him flinch. And I put my hand down, and I never used that again for, the rest of their lives. They were young, thankfully. They didn't live with that. But it was just like the whole, that physical part of how we try to control people, you see that in it. And I just think about with the kids with that, how, absolutely unnecessary it is as we talked about. We just change. Sometimes you're trying to save the kid from hurting themselves, but you learn these things are not, that are not viable to do anymore. And I kind of went back and I thought about this. I kind of went back to my basics, and I wanted to. I spent a little time looking at a guy I learned a lot from. His name was Lundy Bancroft. He was a very influential researcher on domestic violence, and he was a counselor for DD programs and things. And kind of went back to my stuff with him, and I kind of looked at drawing together the stuff we know about offenders and how they interact with children. I'm just going to kind of run through some of that a little bit more. This is a little bit more kind of by the book than I normally have talked here about. Before I forget, I did want to call out, we were in Signal Akron. I don't know if you're aware, there's a new news site in Akron called Signal. It's also Signal Cleveland, and we were on their list of things to do this week. So this weekend, we're listed in the so I really like Signal. They've become a very good news source for local things. So I was very happy to see that we showed up in there. So, we're talking about what people who abuse do with their children and how it pulls over, that power and control. Again, it goes back to the children, right? I'm still going to, I have to control you in my household. That sense of entitlement, as it goes from, we know that so much about people who are abusers have that high sense of entitlement, and when you start adding children into the house, right? Where does mom's or dad's, whoever's the care attention go? It goes to this needy child, and if I'm no longer the center of attention, right? Now it's drawing back to me. So so now I'm pulling stuff away from the kids because the kids, they shouldn't have my attention. The mother should have my attention. She's been paying attention to me. That lack of accountability, where it's other people's fault. Something goes wrong in the house. This can't just be someone's mistake, and it certainly can't be my mistake, right? That kids are learning that this externalization of responsibility. It can't be something I did wrong, and what you did caused this to happen. And so, again, just that same kind of behaviors as being modeled as people are working, when their children in the household. We talk about manipulativeness all the time, and that the same way someone is an abuser in the house is manipulating the person they're abusing, the same thing they're doing with children. The children don't know how to act in the house. They don't know what is going to cause a good outcome, what's going to cause a bad outcome. Sometimes, we've talked about this, with the people who are in abusive relationships. They know at least I'm safest when I know when they're being mean, so I know what's going to happen. At least then I don't have any illusion about what's about to happen to me. Kids can come. Kids into that same mode, you know, if they're, at least I'm getting a spanking, at least I know what I'm being yelled at least I know what he's gonna do, what she's gonna do. You live, you know, you're living in an illusion of what a good family is, 'cause, right, one of the things we know about really very manipulative abusers is that they create this picture outside the circle of how everything is great. And if a child's seeing, well, we're out in public, everyone loves the abuser, but in the house, it's horrible, well, that must be how the world works. You put on the thing, we talked, I love that privacy versus secrecy thing. That's a kind of thing where so that becomes what's our norm. Our norm is that it's okay that this is what it is. Another thing I had kind of forgot about when I was looking through this stuff was children being rewarded for that secrecy, right? You get it, remember, you stay quiet about this. We're gonna go to the, do this fun thing. But you gotta remember, we can't be talking about what's been going on here. You can't talk about mom crying, when we're at this stuff. We can go to the party with the same way you go to the party with the whole family. Oh, we might not go if you don't, know how to behave, how to keep the stuff out,
Sometimes that child, they get tired just like we do. And when they get tired, they don't care what you offer them.
Yeah.
And then they're gonna tell.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was really, comes up too is when an abuser's treating the other parent with disrespect and superiority, what's the illusion? What do you teach the kid, right? You're teaching them that person is not the good person in the household, right? They're stupid, they're weak, they don't know what's going on, and children becoming, that disrespect that starts to grow in children about, whether it's, boys modeling fathers or girls modeling mothers, those kinds of things where the person who should be here starts to come down here farther and farther and farther in their eyes. And, again, it's pulling over that same stuff that it's the same stuff I watch people do with abuse with adults, it's bringing up with children. Interesting thing, and I don't know the statistics I have are a little old for this, but at the time it was about 7 times more likely that physical child abuse could happen in a house with a high physical abuse abuser, right? The amount of physical abuse with a verbal controlling abuser, it still kind of carries over the kids. But if there's a high physical abuse, the chances are just exponentially greater of someone using it with the child. One of the things that I remember thinking about is how much of children as possessions are in abusive relationships, and that whole dynamic of everything has to be because you're mine, and the kind of way that twists how we feel about you feel about what happens with you. I remember one of the things that that really upset, I used to call out on people who I worked with was, was the whole, well, I know I abuse them, but I love my kids. I was like, there is nothing in the world that a child loves at birth more than its mother, right? And you want to come and tell me that, oh, I love my children, but you hurt the thing that your child loved more than anything else, that's just that natural bond of mom and kids, and you want to tell me that you love your mom, you love them, how much you love them, and they're going to watch, or the thing of nobody else knows what's going on. I don't know, but y'all, but if I'm yelling in the basement, my house, you can hear me upstairs. If you're you know, our houses aren't soundproof, and they have, you know, you have these, you know, you got ducks in the house that carries everything around, right? You know, it's like, you know, I've had people tell me, I've never done anything to anybody in front of the kids. Well, yeah, you have, because, you know, houses are porous. Sound and, you know, anger moves through a house, right? You know, let alone just the feeling of tension and anger, you know? So, the other thing about kids that, you know, then we see the, you know, and I saw this repeatedly about, we've talked about the cyclic nature of abuse coming from generation to generation. And, you know, when dads are, or whoever's the role model, you know, these people are role models. And what do? If you're my role model, what am I teaching you? I'm teaching you how to hurt someone. I'm teaching you satisfaction comes through controlling people, manipulating them. You know, when you look at a male-female thing, you're teaching them that, you know, boys, teaching that women are weak or incompetent and not able to, or lesser than, you know, because that's the way that manipulation works, because I have to build me up, keep building me up, I have to keep tearing you down, right? Yeah, the narcissist. There's a current politician who's very famous now, who, when I go through and check boxes when you do narcissistic and abusive behaviors, that I like check boxes and I'm like, you know, it's like, those of us who see it, right? But I wonder who that is. Yeah. I don't know. She's running for president. I don't know. But you can, right? You watch that narcissistic behavior that happens with people that control the other, and then it creates the dynamic of, you know, who's the fun person, who does all the work. The person being abused, they're supposed to want to do all the work, but the person abused, I get to have all the fun. I get to go out and do all the things I like to do. You know, but they got to make sure everything's right, you know, so I come back. You know, those all things we see. The kids pick up that same lesson as we see it, right? I think about, you know, that whole dynamic of those who, you know, I think talked about this thing with trafficking, right? People who love you get to abuse you, right? The lesson that we teach is that, and that's just, you know, how we twist that. We twist love, you know, it gets twisted and twisted and twisted. I've, you know, I work with a lot of, you know, especially now I'm working more in substance abuse, and I work with a lot more, you know, women who have been, you know, go through the abusive nature on that side. I was working with mostly men for the last 15, 20 years, 20 years, haven't been that long, but that's how you know, politicians can make up stuff, right? 15, 20 years, yeah, I've been doing it forever, you know, so and I was thinking about the other thing that I see with men when they come up or I listen to their kids, you know, that just that undermining the authority of the other parent, right? You know, just how they, you know, and then, you know, again, that twist of stuff is like, people are suffering from trauma, right? This is a trauma thing. You know, we know so much more about trauma now than when I first started doing this. And, but that when you're suffering trauma, right, you're reactive. If my child's crying, right, I'm going to yell at you because I am now angry, tense, you know, flashing out at anything that is perceived to be a problem. And, you know, I want to take it. And, you know, so again, what happens in the household, right? The victim is becomes seen as the person as causing the problem, you know. The other thing that we all know, talk about often is, I had a quote here from some I saw from Reading, says, children don't know who to love and who to hate in those relationships. You know, and that is such a, I think I see that. And again, I kind of talk at this in some ways a little bit too much from the book, but we know we can all empathize. You know, we empathize with what we know can happen with the child and what we see. When I see the results of what has happened. I didn't work with a lot of children over my time in my life. I've always worked. I was trained as a teacher. I've almost always worked with adults my whole life. So you see these different things. The other thing that I saw a lot is what happens when the split comes, when they come. And here's where I watch from the courts, right? Where the abuser is able to come into court and create this illusion of who they are. And, they have to show the mother as a failure, right? That she has to be a failed person. I hear the PowerPoint of children being used as that, fulcrum to kind of keep people from, leaving or coming back. I'll do this to the kids if you don't. I won't give you child support. I won't do this. I won't do that, unless you do these things. And I have seen, it's one of the most upsetting parts of working in domestic violence is watching children be used as footballs, right? And being brought into adult problems. These are adult problems, not children problems. We were talking earlier about, Brenda and I were talking earlier about visiting, you have a parent who's maybe the good parent, but you also serve this parent out here, and you have trying to negotiate that, how you let a person, keep these people in lives and protect them from a dangerous person, but, they still have, one of the things we see in domestic, or in like child stuff is that it's really hard sometimes to tell what's just bad parenting and what's abusive parenting, right? Being a bad parent is not, a reason to call CSB, right? We may wish we could give them something, and I've had people where I wish I could give them CSB services, right? Because they're just not a good parent, but they're not a dangerous parent, right? And that's where that line, where's the dangerousness, and that where, just watching courts where I hear that same thing, oh, she's the one who did it. He's the, that whole back and forth where now some of the courts are very confused. And you can see when we deal with this stuff in court, when we have some people who change stories, and we have to investigate every story that comes my way. If they tell me that, if I say the person says, well, I'm doing it, but I also said, but they would say she's doing it. Well, now as the investigator, I have to look because I can't take the risk of it being true. Right, I have to, I used to tell people all the time, I would get calls all the time about, this person did this, and I would tell the person, it's like, I'm not sure if it's going to be right or wrong, but what I know is that you're on the hook until I figure it out, and if I find out that I'm wrong and I put you in jail, I will do everything I can to fix that problem. But because of our nature of fear to hurt, we don't want a child to be hurt. We don't want an adult, a victim to be hurt, right? Who's ever on point is the one who's going to suffer first, and sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong, and that's very hard for courts to deal with, and that makes the courts seem very, I don't want to use callous, but it feels like, you're like, I must be telling you the truth. You should believe me because you've had to live it. Right, and when we're up here on the, looking at it from the third floor down, it's trying to see where all the pieces are moving. It's very difficult sometimes, and that, and that puts those kids to me in that spot where they're just kicked back and forth of who they're going to, what's going to happen with them. An interesting thing I watched too is, we have rightly come to the belief about mutual parenting. There is none of this one person, we split, but that's also a tool of manipulation, because the courts want us to they want everybody to have both their kids in there. And one of the things I was told, and I would tell them to finish up with this, is that I have believed over the years, and I've told people over the years, that in the end, I truly think kids know who the sane and who the insane parent was in the relationship. I just don't see it happen in the time we want it to happen. And sometimes a lot of damage can happen between when they learn that, which is why I always just keep teaching people, just keep loving the person that you need to care about, and you're gonna hope for, in the end, we'll see what happens.
Do you work in a domestic relations court?
No, I work
Just
in the,
domestic violence.
I work in felony courts with felony domestic violence cases. That's where I was for all those years.
Okay.
I will tell you that just a real quick update, because I did try to update you, the DV court is still chugging right along. We have 2 different tracks now, so that there's a track for people who are more severe abuse, and some who have kind of gotten in the system where it hasn't gotten that bad. And so we try to keep, and they have done a lot of work with different protocols of trying to work on violence now. We're trying to have different programs now. There's been a bit of a treatment for domestic violence offenders got a little stagnant, and there hasn't been a lot of change here. And I think the trauma work that we use now, the different things that we had, because a lot of the people who we see come in front of us were often these children who sat in these households and watched the things we just talked about happen, and that's where they come from. But we also know that quite often, unfortunately, change is really hard. Sometimes with that ingrained abuse, and unfortunately, punishment becomes like it's what we have left, because we're not creating change, and all we can do is protect kids and victims for as long as we can from someone sometimes, because we can't create change as much as we try. It's a lot different than sometimes I don't compare abusers to addiction too often, because it's a whole different dynamic. You talk about the abuser, about the person, about either kids, because they're addicted. A drug is not a person, right? If you're an addiction, that's not a person anymore, right? You're living in a disease that is all controlling, and what you do is completely overwhelms all the things that you believe. I remember watching this happen. Started to watch it when we had the crack epidemic, but I really watched it with the amphetamine epidemic. And it was even worse then. Opiate people are a little not quite the same. That's a whole different wave too of things. With people who are opiate addicted tend to be in some ways more functional, but also can pass out much harder and deeper. And you can look at a kid. I've worked with people who are alcoholic over the years, when you're passed out and the kid starts the house on fire, right? Or, walks out in the street, right? Those are things that you can't. So it's a very different dynamic than, they're both much involved with trauma, but very different in how you try to make change. And that's, I think, I had. Like I say, I have to go back and question myself, what kind of expert am I nowadays? I'm going to make sure I have Kelly next time to make sure but I did it a long time, so it kind of doesn't get too far from me. But I felt this was definitely a topic that I felt a little belt in the weeds for you all about talking about it. So I hope what I said made some sense.
Oh, yes.
When a kid or a child sees the dynamics of a parent, of losing one parent, the love that child has for that parent, this is one of the reasons why the kid feels their opposite parent. Because they see so much happening with their mother being abused and thrown around and beat up or whatever the case may be. That is a problem or a traumatic situation for that child. So when that child grows up, they either wait after a certain amount of time, a year, and they'll go back and kill that parent because of what they've done, or what they've done to them.
Right.
And it becomes more of a struggle to understand the mentality of that child. Why they are the way they are. Because I know I struggle a lot with some of these kids. I struggle a lot with some of these kids I come in contact with, and I'll be like, okay. And it's like, sometimes it will make me back up because I don't want to get emotionally involved in it.
you know, because I'm old school. And so it's like, okay, but I have to, I'm still fighting within myself to understand some of the hardcore dynamics of drugs. Because when you said they're not people or that's not that person, in my head it's like, oh yeah, they are the same people. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so when I come in contact with stuff like that, I'll be like, you know, you make a choice. First you make a decision to do what you do. Then you make a choice to follow up what you do. So how can you feel like you need somebody to baby you or comfort you in a situation where you had that in your head?
Yeah.
You're what they call it, it's almost like being an accessory to what you know. And so I struggle with that because I know this is a different time and era, but I struggle with it because I look at kids, they're not scared of you no more.
No.
They're literally not. And they can say what they want to say to you. They can do whatever. And it's like really has come down to the point of what they say all these programs is help to help. But some of these programs don't even do anything for these people. It's not the program, it's the person that just, you know, well, the court made me come here and do it. I don't care about all that. You know.
I always tell people I'm just a map maker. You know, they say when I get to the end I helped you. I said, no, I didn't. I showed you where to go to change, and you decided whether you had to decide where to change. I know it's about whether it's abuse or addiction. My job is to create this gap between that first thought of I want to do this, and that's a good idea, right? The longer that gap is between making the wrong choice and the good choice, so you have time to think about it. I will tell you this about addiction. So real quick, because I don't want to get into addiction treatment with y'all. Addiction is just thinking like taking 3 or 4 X-Lax and then thinking I don't have to go to the bathroom. That's when you're actively in addiction. Not when you've been separated from it. When you're actively in addiction, when we get you separated, choices come back in. Mm-hmm. But at the time when an addiction takes over your body and your mind, that's the best analogy I ever heard about how to think about it.
I like that.
So, all right, it's lunchtime. I'm sorry. I won't talk.
Oh, no, you're just fine. No, you're fine. Thank you, David. Made us think a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right now, I'm leaving our Facebook Live one just for a few minutes, leaving it on because we're not going to be leaving too long, okay? We are going to have our lunch, it's a light lunch, and a light refreshments, and then we're coming right back. And while we are enjoying ourselves and having a nice meal, we're going to enjoy Nancy's going to be our expert and with some true life experiences, and she's going to say a few things. And then, of course, we're going to have Nikki. And then, of course, we're going to have Brother Dan.
We're running out of time quickly.
I'll quit. You
Okay.
always put me last on the program.
No, because you have so much to offer.
I know.
And then, we'll be digested by then. Okay. Okay, and I know that you're going to have to leave. And then, but it was a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to hear what you had to say. Oh, you're welcome, Beth.
Yeah, reach out next year.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And before you leave, Carla has a nice little gift for you, okay?
Yeah.
On the brochure, I remember like if somebody wanted to.
Oh, yeah. Well, here, I can give you our cards too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, right now we can have some, you know what? Yes, I'll give it to Artelia, I hope you don't mind, but could you have prayer with us before we have our meal?
Dear Heavenly Father, we come today thanking you for the many, many blessings you have stored for us. Thank you for this panel. Go with us today as we eat, and may it be nourishing for our bodies, and bless us all in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Amen. Yes, you
Amen.
are.
So make
Yes, you
yourself at home, and then after everyone is seated and have their food, we will continue back. Thank you.
So you want me to wait till they remain seated?
Yeah, we'll just get their food first and
Yeah.
everybody's, yeah. And then
Get
make sure
mine.
they have their attention.
I'll get mine and put something on.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
My
Hi
name's
there.
Erin.
Yes.
Remember she met? Yeah, so I didn't hear anything from you guys, and then I've got like so busy and all that.
Maybe my email was, I thought you signed, I thought I had an email.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't get it. You don't have to leave.
Okay, did you email?
I got my phone number. Okay, I'll put my name down.
Now, what your stuff? There's a program there, if you like.
Okay.
That one is kind of.
No, I just left my
That one. Oh, wow. Well, bless your heart. That's so sweet. Oh, it's all about the love. You're so sweet. Is green your favorite color? No. But this color is pretty. Now I'm going to ask you if you can stand back.
Yeah, I don't know if it's good. My email or something.
Yeah.
I get like so many emails.
Before you leave, I need Brenda to take a picture with you. 1 second. You know, you left it I have instructions, right? Okay. Before you leave, do you mind saying a few words I could videotape? With your title, just a little, about a sentence or two. Okay, when I give you the fits.
Hi, I'm Beth Cardina. I'm the program coordinator for the CASA Guardian Ad Litem program at Juvenile Court, and I was thrilled to be here this morning to talk about the good services in our community and our partnerships that we can make in the future.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, and have a great day. You too. Thank you. Reach out. What? Here's my card. Oh, yeah. I'm going to take a card. I will reach out next year because
I'm sorry, forgive me, you see, I've back and forth I finally got the dissolution done, so my husband and I are separated, now we're exes.
Oh, you're divorced?
Yeah, finally.
I mean, it's a joke, but it's true.
It is true. Like he may have
to do. You know, it's hard for them to like confide in.
And you might not feel they can relate. Yeah.
Right, like yeah,
Even
right.
like me.
Yeah, it's not the same.
he wasn't helping her.
You know, like, yeah. Are you getting that kind of too?
Yes,
Sure.
I want you to take it, and then you need to surround your day around positive people. Yeah. You know, remember, everybody does that. So when you come to the power of training, it's like you're safe. Yeah, you know, we're not here to judge or anything wrong. We're here to make ways. Now, it's going to be a little challenging down the road, you know. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have many days that you can't, but that's the healing process. So you have my number, so if you ever need to call, okay? That's the way. All right. I know we're always on the go, so you see me, and I'll be taking pictures and videotaping. Okay.
I gotta get back to work. And then I'll come back in if I have a chance.
Okay, and then you do all of that, and then we're gonna follow that, and then you take your number on there.
And my email, yeah. All right, sounds good.
So it's your son?
Yeah, my son, yeah.
Are you using any sign language or anything? Is he verbal?
I
I worked with autistic children.
Yeah, he uses sign language. So we use the simple sign language.
Things that everybody knows, like
Yeah,
more,
Yep.
stop,
Yep.
eat, yeah. Words.
Yep. So he's trying to say words, but he's not.
But he's trying because also, sometimes it can take a long way to fingers.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kind of lost track of
so let's give them a pill.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to get eyes, ears, lots of sun. Just in case.
Lots of legal changes.
Just in case. They're wrong.
Yeah.
Man is not right all the time.
I know.
So you ought to. My daughter's a foster mother.
Wasn't like one of those mutual cases where we don't charge each other.
Exactly. No, that child. Okay. But actually, you need to have a journal, you need to be documenting so then you go back and oh my gosh, or you say, okay, they started misbehaving and doing this, and certain people come around. Red flag. Okay. Like in Ministries, there's some children that are challenged, autism, they can't express themselves. And so they're screaming and yelling and you just say, oh, so act out, you know, but no, they're crying for help, but they don't know how to do it. And they're so frustrated. We'll talk later, you know, I put one on. I just got done
because they don't understand what they're trying to tell.
yeah, and then they don't have the patience, like they said, some over for 2 or 3 jobs. Just got done having one of the clients.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, the daughter and the guy
Yeah, that's what they're trying to figure out is either autism or speech delay. Yeah, sensory. Yeah, she has a sensory disorder.
certain food.
Yep.
A lot of autism, some autism kids. Yeah. We'll talk. I don't want to say too much more because I know some people would drawn out and I want to leave them up. All right. Well, thank you, Aaron. Yeah. And this is me.
Hi.
We're all hungry. Lunch is over. I'm hungry. Yeah, last time I didn't get any
Oh, geez.
I'm like, this time I'm gonna get something.
Yeah, you better.
Yes, you better eat.
Yeah, I got it.
Remember what I said? And then
Let me slide it up over.
my anniversary is October 30th.
But Brenda's right here. Okay, I push mine over. Because I'm getting ready to go up.
Autistic, those are addicted to drugs, alcohol, mental illness, opposed spectrum. And then I also work with the mothers. Okay. People, some of my gifts, because I'm trying to take advantage and say, oh, she can do it. And then why I want to work with myself. Oh, really? Yeah, so, and it's not the public. Okay, you know what this, the hush is kind of like a real. So it's clients within the agency. And so they kind of use me in order to get their children back in CMT. And then I got a real too. I'm working, you know, kids love me, and they're so I'm making that, and I'm gonna have, I got my whole thing here.
Alright, so it's on the card you gave me, right? It's like,
Okay, it tells me that.
Alright, sounds good, thank you. Alright, you too. I'll try to pop back in if I can. Alright, you too.
A little bit about what we are. Okay.
Yeah, so I might pop back in. I'll see if I can.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Alright, thank you.
That's why I like overthinking. People that are able to just look at the whole picture and be like, this is not fair. We should look at why we I've had a lot of
Future oriented.
You know, because I want to consider another third.
Thank you. Okay, so all right.
And the other is,
Oh, we do it 3 times.
all of those things are equally important.
It's equal to the. Take care of your business. Oh, no, okay.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. You too.
As you all get ready to finish eating up your food, I would like to have your attention if I can. As you sit back and eat and enjoy your meal, I just want to kind of get your attention so I can go ahead and do my little portion of my memories and things that I want to reflect upon. Train up a child in the way he should go, and he is old, he will not turn from it. Proverbs 22:6. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. Proverbs 29:17. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger. Psalms 8:2. He called a little child to him and placed that child among them. And he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 18:2-3. As I reflect upon children of any age or race or gender, my passion is to speak up for anyone of whom I felt needed to be protected. I have worked in different fields, and I have been a protector to the elderly, the DD community, and by far my most memorable moments were with the children that I was a licensed foster parent for. And I was working with the children that were therapeutic, which are the children that typically was on medications or had different mental disorders and handicaps. This position came naturally to me. I was always somewhere helping children, and others. A major influencer was my mom. She loved everyone and was definitely a giver. That was said at her funeral. And my Aunt Joanne Richmond. She was another of them of whom ran her own outreach ministry just because. She gave away clothing. We would give away clothing to the homeless. She would cook big home-cooked meals. We're not talking your average meal. She was cooking Thanksgiving meals and barbecues and ribs. She said, I want them to eat like I eat. I want them, if nothing else, you got a good meal. And then she would also give them her, along with her meals, she would give them testimonies, her pamphlets of her testimonies, to let them know that they can overcome a lot of obstacles. And she was also an abuse victim sexually. There are so many cases where children were treated in a horrible manner. I guess you can say I was built for this. I remember feeling a certain way about someone, no proof, just feeling that someone, I'll call him Mr. Rick, wasn't right. Even got into arguments with people over this particular person. And a lot of people disagreed. Oh, he's a father, he's this, he's not that type of guy, da-da-da-da-da-da. He may be on drugs, but he's not a bad person because he's got a child and he was married or da-da-da-da-da. And I just had a gut feeling, and I didn't lay off of it. And actually due to me not wanting him around children, I got a feeling that just what's in my gut stomach that I didn't want him around these toddlers, these specific toddler children. And I argued, I fussed, and everything else. Well, fast forward, about 15 years later, this same person that I call Mr. Rick went to prison behind sexually trafficking his girlfriend's 4 or 5-year-old daughter. And this was in another state, Florida. But one of the people who did drugs along with Mr. Rick, when he seen what was going on and he was being offered the little girls, he went to the authorities and reported him. He says, I may be on dope, but I don't do this. I have so many memories of sad situations and or cases of sexual or physical abuse by the hands of the ones that were the closest to them. I say, what doesn't feel right or seem right isn't right. Follow your instincts. These children, in my opinion, to me, were like putting a puzzle back together. Some pieces fit and some did not. Just like even in our government foster care system programs, some children should not be placed in some people's homes. But for those who have a genuine heart for children, like myself, we can stay silent no more. No hush. Watch whose hands is rocking the cradle. And that's all I got to say. And I get emotional about it because I love kids. I've always been an advocate. I don't even have to know the kid. If I see something that don't look right or feel right, I'm going to watch. I'm going to intervene. I'm going to speak up. And I'm going to do my best to protect. And it's sad when you are fighting the court system yourself to protect your own. But that's who I am. I'm that grandma. I'm that mom. I'm that friend. I'm that aunt. And children are my heart, and that's my passion. I wouldn't care if I wasn't getting a penny for it. Foster care was never to me about money. It was about my desire to protect and love and foster children, to let them know they can be okay. They have futures, and I put it into them, and I speak over life over them. To let them know you can be whatever you want to be, no matter what you've been through. I would tell them, if you come because you want a house to live in, you ain't got to worry about things being done right. But if you come to destroy your home, you're in the wrong place.
Give Nancy a hand. Thank you, Nancy.
It's nothing like having on-hand experience, is it? As we continue, and you enjoy your meal, I have Nikki Crawford, Education and Outreach Manager for Hope and Healing Survivor Resource Center. And I met Nikki a couple years ago. Was it a couple years ago or 3 years ago? It was something like that.
Give or take, I started this about 3 years ago.
I think it was when you first came in.
Yes.
Yes. But we were very impressed with Nikki because she was very informative, and we really enjoyed her. And I'm so glad that you were the ones to come back again today.
Thank you.
So we turn the floor over to you.
Awesome, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, good afternoon, everybody. How are we holding up with all the information we're learning today? We've got a lot of knowledge going in. So, I am actually really happy that I did prepare my traditional content that I usually come in. I have presentations set up, I've got bits I like to say, the same jokes that if you've seen me before, you probably have heard them. However, when I saw the amount of professionals coming here today and the different agencies coming in, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be exactly like my services, and I'm just going to wrap a nice little bow on everything else everybody else is doing, and kind of touch on some other things that we have some expertise on. So my goal is to introduce myself, my agency, give a little bit of background about what we do in the community, resources, and then the second half of this, I'm going to open up kind of to a town hall. I'm going to address some questions that have already been asked because I do have some information to share with that. And I also want to hear what you all are seeing and thinking about when it comes to the people in your communities that you would like some advice, questions, answers, etc., related to what we're talking about today. So my name is Nikki Crawford. My pronouns are she, they, proud trans woman, and I am the Education and Outreach Manager at Hope and Healing Survivor Resource Center. By a quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with the agency Hope and Healing? It's a couple hands, absolutely. By a quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with the Battered Women's Shelter or the Rape Crisis Center? A lot more hands. So my goal here is to tell you all that we are all the same agency. So we have been in Summit County for the past 50 years. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary of being created in the basement of a couple volunteers of our founding mothers. And as a part of that journey, we've come to a lot of different realizations, a lot of faults that we've made, a lot of faults that nationally crisis centers have made, ways that we could do things better, change how we've approached the community. And one of those big things that we've acknowledged is there's so many barriers for people to come forward and talk about the things that we've talked about today. We've talked about many of those barriers already, but one of the ones that we were able to take accountability for was just in our name. If you are someone who identifies as male, you're probably not going to call a battered women's shelter. That was just kind of the reality we were facing. If you were somebody who is experiencing stalking, you probably weren't calling a rape crisis center because you didn't think those services were for you. So our goal was to eliminate that entire barrier from the beginning, and about 3 years ago an initiative started to become Hope and Healing Survivor Resource Center, and as of this year we are legally Hope and Healing Survivor Resource Center. So if you're ever wondering what happened to the Battered Women's Shelter, why is Hope and Healing coming in and stealing their jobs, we are all the same people. So that's my housekeeping to get us started here. So I've been with Hope and Healing for the past 3 years. I would be here for about 5 years if we counted my volunteer times. And I've seen a lot of how the community's evolved over the past 5 years. I'm initially from Youngstown, that is where I was born and raised. And then I came over to Akron when I started coming to college, and I started learning a lot more about the Northeast Ohio community as a whole outside of where I just grew up. And I started seeing patterns. I started seeing how people were actually talking about this. Rather than what a textbook says at my university, rather than what my training says based on whatever nationwide research we've done, I was seeing trends that are happening right here in Akron. So Hope and Healing is the resource center for survivors of domestic and intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking in Summit and Medina County. We oversee so many different areas of those victimizations that we have one of the most broadest resource lists available in Ohio for a lot of different crisis centers. Summit County and Medina County have a unique opportunity when it comes to our services in the sense that most counties do not have both a domestic violence center or a rape crisis center. Sometimes they have one or the other or neither, and very rarely are those the same agency. Very rarely there's a lot of overlapping areas that, oh, we don't help with this, you now need to call this person to get help. Our job is trying to make sure that anybody experiencing any of those victimizations could get resources from one place while also collaborating very heavily with the community. A lot of the people in this panel we have worked with in the past, and the goal to make sure that when their role drops off, they have an advocate that follows up while the person is going to the next place. Or when our role drops off, we have more specialized care in different community aspects that help out. So I'd like to bring awareness to those aspects because not a lot of people know that Akron community and Summit County has advocates that are boots on the ground, doing the work, talking to individuals, and opening up that conversation from the beginning before seeking any resources. So if someone's just thinking, I'm trying to think about going to court, or I'm trying to think about getting a protection order or going to a hospital, they could start that journey with some professionals who will guide and be empathetic and trauma-informed and supportive through that process. So some things I wanted to talk about that we're kind of piggybacking off of the content that we already talked about today because there's so much good information. I wanted to broaden what we were looking at when it comes to child abuse and domestic violence. We talk a lot about domestic violence, but we also need to have conversations about intimate partner violence and teen dating violence in particular for this conversation. When we're looking at the violence that is occurring, we are often looking at it from a household perspective and not often thinking about the entire community's interpretation of these things. How is there harm that might not be labeled as abuse but has perpetuated abuse in our community? One of those big things that I talk about often, and is going to be the core of this discussion today, is a lot of abusers, modern day abusers, are people who have been abused themselves. We've talked about that in several of these discussions already. But that also applies to the people being abused right now. If we're not giving the resources to the children that are being abused right now properly in a 360 resource encompassing effort, we're going to see future abusers. We're going to see individuals who were hurt because hurt people hurt people. So when we're looking at dating violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, whichever terminology we want to use, we want to look at the whole picture. Yes, we're incredibly focused on a child has been physically, emotionally, or psychologically harmed in some capacity, but also how has the reaction of the community played into that? Was a child viewed as being provocative and seducing an adult? Was a child viewed as they were being promiscuous or behaving in taboo ways? Did that play into the acceptance or denial of resources from the community towards that person seeking help? When we're looking at the full picture and all these different dynamics, somebody telling somebody because of what you wore is why you got abused is not abuse, but it plays into the long-term effects of abuse. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the concept of the pyramid of violence. If anyone ever wants a graph to put up in a school or something, anything like that, there is a formal graph that has these information on it, but it talks about where violence occurs. Violence often starts at the bottom of a pyramid with attitudes and beliefs. When we are talking about how do people get to the point that they have harmed someone psychologically or physically, there's often a concept of beliefs. Whether that is, I believe I am better than somebody else because of X, Y, and Z reasons, or I believe the person that I'm hurting is less than human because of the beliefs that I've had. These are brought in from the community, and we see these in the children that we're working with that are harming other children and other adults. We're seeing dynamics where children are being raised in households where they're witnessing abuse from an abuser to the person being abused, and in the case that it might be a father to a mother, we're seeing somebody treating a woman as less than human, as property, as something that doesn't get a say. And so the child, if not checked up, maybe the mother gets resources, maybe they escape, maybe they get out of that, maybe even the husband gets arrested in that instance. If nobody followed up with the child, there's still a belief there that the mother may have deserved that. There's still a belief there that because of how that was being treated, that's how I'm going to treat my partners moving forward, because that's the model I had. We see this in other relationships where maybe I'm not the one that grows up to be an abuser, but because I saw abuse, I'm now telling my friends about what I've seen and convincing them that these behaviors are normalized. It's a social dynamic that has normalized how we treat each other. We see in college settings, I oversee a lot of Title IX cases. One of the core components of young adult and teenage harm on each other is a clear misunderstanding of basic autonomy, basic respect, and not an acknowledgement that there is a level of autonomy there. Where we see individuals where maybe I'm called in because I sent an unsolicited nude to somebody. I didn't see a problem in that because I was just showing off. I was giving them a gift. I was doing something that I thought was flirting, while not even acknowledging how the other person could have been harmed in that, because I don't need to think about other people. It's not about that. So looking at the cultural dynamics of how more than just the abuse we talked about today, but the reactions of the community, the backlash, the information that we're giving people also plays a big part. I want to dive in a little bit about the conversation we brought up earlier about pornography. Pornography is a very much tiptoe conversation on whether or not what you as a parent want to do for your child. You can either completely remove it from a child's life, completely restrict it, make it taboo that we don't talk about it, but inevitably someone is going to introduce your child to pornography, and they're not going to have someone to talk about it with. You can restrict it. That is a viable use of your parenting skills and your guidance, and say, you don't interact with this. This is bad for your health. But eventually someone is going to talk to your kid about pornography. Somebody is going to bring it up. And that's a matter of, is that person going to be informative? The majority of men growing up learn how to have sex from pornography. The majority of women growing up learn about sex through female figures in their life, their mothers, their grandmothers, etc., like that. They talk about that dynamic. But if that's non-existent, they also learn about it through pornography. One of my suggestions, I'm not a parent expert, I'm not a life guru. If I was, I'd be traveling the country and I'd be making a lot more money. But is find a way that you can have these conversations with children from an early age. You don't have to support it, you don't have to encourage it, you don't have to allow it. But to have a conversation at some point in a child's life to say, the things you see online, the things that are being shared, the things that are being distributed are not reality. They are staged. They are meant to meet fantasies. And a lot of the times, that's a lot of the education that a lot of young men have to go through, is that you don't have to be rough. You don't have to be harmful. You don't have to be doing all these things that are considered taboo to enjoy being intimate. And that's one of the flaws we're seeing right now, is a lot of young adults and children, from the moment they have access to a device that has internet, whether it has a child filter, whether there's a lock on it, they have access to pornographic materials. If the device they're using has internet on it, somebody can contact them and they can reach these materials one way or another, whether it's a misclick, whether it's a link, whether it's a conversation. The conversation came up earlier about Roblox. And what's really important to know about that is Roblox is one of the key places because that's where most kids are going right now, but it's everywhere. If you have a child that is on Disney Plus and they're watching shows on there, it is possible that they can go from Disney Plus to clicking a terms of service link that takes you to a browser, and now they're on the internet. They could go from, I'm looking at YouTube Kids, and they click just the right button, and now there's a video that has gone through the filter. And I don't know if y'all have ever watched YouTube Kids in detail to some of the videos out there, but there is provocative content on there in the forms of children videos. And what I will tell people, I have a background in psychology, a little bit background in clinical counseling. I'm no means a psychological expert, but one thing that I have heard and can attest to, when a child first is introduced to non-filtered sexual content, doesn't mean discussion, it doesn't mean reading a book. We're talking about seeing videos, seeing somebody have sex, participating in a sexual act. That changes hormones and stuff in the brain. And they are more likely to continue participating in that moving forward. The first time a child learns about self-satisfaction, they're more likely to seek that out with other children. And then we have cases of young children hurting young children. So when we're talking about these taboo conversations we don't want to have, it might be worth considering how much you're comfortable talking about or bringing in a professional to talk about them in an age-appropriate manner. Because if they are exposed to these things before you are ready to talk about it, they're not going to wait for you to talk about it. They're going to start participating in unfiltered behavior based on whatever they've already learned. And it might be too late to stop them from hurting somebody else. So have these conversations, talk to people about them. It's really important that we're talking about, earlier we were talking about the consent laws and who do we talk to if we wanted to observe or change those things. I'm not going to give names because I'm supposed to be apolitical, not partisan, anything like that. But there are politicians out there that are introducing bills based on human trafficking, sexual violence rights, victims advocacy rights. Whatever it is you believe that you would like to back or support, maybe contact those politicians that are participating in those things to see, is this something they're willing to look at? Because yes, there has been lots of questions about consent laws in Ohio. There has been a lot of questions nationally about whether 16 is an appropriate age of consent. That is a cultural background that perpetuates rape culture. The things that I wanted to bring up here was the culture behind a lot of the things we do. So with the rest of the time that I have here, I wanted to open up a conversation because I could start throwing out facts about different things I've seen, but I wouldn't be saying anything that wasn't already covered by the other experts on this panel. So I wanted to give some of my time back to concerns in your community that you are thinking that a rape crisis center or domestic violence center or any kind of resource center should be addressing directly in a community that maybe we might not be. And then general questions as well, I'm more than open to. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I know about or seen is young men from the ages of 12 to whatever. And you got young men walking around with their hands down their pants. And you ask them to take their hands off their pants. Why are you walking around with your hands down by your thighs? Okay. Second of all, I've literally had to deal with this for a whole year, where these kids, one of the kids got groomed by another child. And I'm literally looking at this, and I'm like, really? Well, you know? So they got this one kid wrapped around their finger. So this one kid, every day, all day long, no matter what, he's playing with himself. I done went to all of the authorities I can go to. No help. Now we got new kids coming in. One of them don't speak English very well. He's got him. You know, and it's like, are you serious? Can you please stop doing it? The other kid who started it all goes around, oh my gosh. And I sit up here going, oh my God. Is that the only person seeing it? And it's like crazy because nobody wants to help. They claim they do, but they're not doing anything. So I have to sit up here and more or less keep voicing my
Absolutely.
self about, stop doing that. That don't belong in here. It stays at home. Why are you doing this? Don't do that to that little boy. This and this and that. And I get the backlash. Oh, it's okay. That's part of their autism.
Oh.
And the thing, my first thing is, you gotta go somewhere with that bull crap. But that's not part of their autism. And everything that they do, they do it because of somebody else.
They learned it.
So one day, I ended up having to talk to somebody, a couple of people. And the person that started the whole thing, grandmother said, where are you getting this from? He didn't want to say nothing. I ain't saying nothing, I'm standing there. She said, I asked you, where are you getting this from? He said, my uncle. And I said, yeah, yes, no. You know why? I knew he was getting it from somewhere. I knew that. But it was the point that nobody is doing anything about helping these kids understand. I understand kids going through puberty. I understand that. But this is going far past puberty. But nobody think I know anything. They think I'm just crazy. I'm complaining. I'm making noise. Okay, whatever.
That's one of the biggest things that I like about my position in the work that I do. I've done advocacy, I've done a lot of work that is direct service, helping people after the harm happens. But the last year or so of my professional career has been focused on prevention, education, stopping things before it occurs, focusing on how can we lessen the numbers we see in the first place, or getting to a point that if it's going to happen already, we can get people talking about it. And so one of the biggest things that I've noticed, and a lot of other people will say, is a lot of children don't naturally develop sexual tendencies. It's usually from seeing something. It's mimicking behavior. Children begin sexual behaviors once proper puberty begins and those hormones are kicking in. It's natural in the body to start wondering those things. That's a part of the talk of puberty, is it's going to happen. But with the age of the internet, with the age of having everything accessible to you at any time, we're seeing children starting younger and younger. We're seeing sexual violence begin in children, on children as young as elementary school. And so when we're talking about policies of like my agency coming in to talk about healthy relationships, boundaries, consent, we're typically only starting at 6th grade when most of these kids have probably already been hurt. Right. And so talking to your local schools, talking to community resources, who can you bring in to start talking to these kids if it's not yourself, about these things before they're happening so that another child doesn't introduce them and start having the same problematic behaviors they might be having. Because obviously it sounds like that child that was experiencing autism symptoms was mimicking another child that was hurt by somebody. And so how do we get that so it's not a snowball effect? Because if that went unnoticed, then that child would have went on to affect another child.
That's what's going on. It's like a circle. The one kid who got the first kid wrapped around his finger, he's trying to get his brother. And the little boy that can't really speak English. And I'm not, like I'm saying, I'm the only one seeing all this, but everybody think I'm crazy.
It's incredibly difficult because there's not a lot of reactive stuff in existence, whether it be boundaries, laws, policies, whatever. If you're in a school, if you're in an agency, there's not a lot in place in terms of what's appropriate for kids. That's one of the highest debated things in our country right now, is what is appropriate for children to be exposed to. So while we're debating what is appropriate and what's not, children are still getting hurt. And so that's where I'm all about, let's start preventing it before it happens, because after the fact it's becoming incredibly difficult to start getting resources.
And the thing about it is, the one that's wrapped around his finger, the young man, he does it anywhere. He doesn't care where he at. He'll play with himself anywhere and let his rise up.
Oh, please don't talk about it.
And I'm sitting up here going,
Oh my God.
I said, are you kidding me? I said, before I walk out this classroom, you better let it go right back down where it belongs.
That's a nice
And I
thing.
mean that. And it's just
Oh my goodness.
it's just crazy and heartbreaking, because they're not being taught at home.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever they being taught at home is not the good thing.
Because that behavior is probably normal at home. I've met a lot of children, either directly by proxy, and young adults who have sexually promiscuous behavior is what I'll call it. That's not the right term, but they're doing things that are out of the norm for children sexually speaking. And it's often situations where in the household nudity is allowed. They're not expected to wear clothes around their parents. Maybe their parents aren't wearing clothes around the children. Maybe things are being done out of the open where the child can see, and now they're going into public spaces that have norms and rules and expecting that same behavior when they go home.
Yeah, and it's like the kid think everything is funny, and he feels they when you try to, when I try, I ain't gonna say nobody else, when I tried to correct them, they act like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. I ain't doing nothing. And I said, listen, do you understand? This is an appropriate act. You cannot bring this to school. You cannot groom other children. And if he can't groom nobody, oh, he gets highly upset. Oh, I mean, he wants to bite himself, break his arm, throw stuff. I'm like, oh, this for some sex? Are you serious? So it's like, I just said, you know what? I said, this year I'm just going to shut up. I ain't going to say nothing else because I can't, nobody want to listen to me. They all say they feel sorry for me because I deal with boys. But I ain't getting nothing done, so I'm just going to just let it go as it is.
Well, I definitely appreciate you bringing it up because it is something to be addressed.
I was listening to Nadine, and I empathize and sympathize with you. Number one, they don't care because they don't have to deal with it. They're pretending that it doesn't, out of sight, out of mind. Let her deal with it. I'm going to go on. They're only about a paycheck. And I hate to be like that, but a lot of people are. And with that, Nadine can keep doing what you're doing. The reason why she needs to keep doing it, make it uncomfortable as possible, and then they will stop. But you have to be persistent. When you want to give up, you got to keep going. And then you need to find someone, you need a mentor, someone that you can reach out to help you, so that in your everyday life, don't let it roll over into your personal life. And then with that being said, those kids, they respect you. They might not like you, but they respect you because you took out time to show that you care. It's all about the love. Tough love is where it's at. And sometimes if you gotta cry, you might have to have a meltdown, but don't let them see you. Never let a child see you, because you have to be their backbone. You're their savior, whether you know it or not. And then I would keep reporting it until they get so tired of it, they said, I'm sick of this lady, let's go and check it out.
It is one of the hardest things that we do, right? Is to keep up the energy to keep doing the next right thing, right? And to help other people, especially when there's a lot of pressure not to do that. Especially as we watch, as we've become I really think, you mentioned it before, we've become very self-centered, narcissistic in our beliefs and how we treat each other. It's all about me kind of stuff, which, I grew up in that. We grew up in that era where it was the me generation. Well, yeah, it was nice, it was better than there was no generation, and I was nothing, right? But it's a struggle to keep, when you keep fighting against those forces, like, we keep, we're involved in doing stuff where kids are, you keep running into the same problem, right? I keep seeing the same people who offend, right? And I'm like, I come and I see a guy in jail again. I'm like, okay, am I going to do this again today? And yeah, I'm going to go do it again today, right? And like, I think you're right, bro. It's finding someone that those things that we find to keep ourselves, our kind of spirit empowered and mentally, is the hard part, right? Because we don't have someplace to turn. This stuff burns you out very badly,
Now, in retrospect from her, me being in the medical field, emergency medicine, I have to detach myself from my patients because I've had to transport children to City Hospital, Boardman Psychiatric Hospital out there, and I took a child out there that was exhibiting some meltdowns. And I was in the back with him and I was talking to him, and I asked him why was he doing the things he was doing. And we just had a real good conversation, a 9-year-old boy, and he told me when I took him in there, he asked me to take him home. That was the hardest. I spent, like 40 minutes with this young man. And I talked to him like, sister over here was saying, I told him he could be anything he wanted to be when he grew up. I never forget that, you know. And I guess I was probably the only person that took 40 minutes. To him was probably a lifetime. To me, it was my job being encouraging, because I'm an advocate for patients, seniors, kids. It doesn't matter. That's what I'm there for, to speak for them when they can't speak for themselves. That was the hardest thing. And I think about that little boy from time to time, what he turned out to be, did he get better, did he get worse? Because we're not asked to reach out to them. I worked at 911 at Safety Dispatch. I had to let that job go because it was too much emotionally for me to do that. Coming from the emergency medicine field, I had to get into another career. But that boy touched my heart. I mean, the things he was doing in the house was just unbelievable. And I had to dismiss that. But in her case, where she's trying to help, I couldn't help. I have to detach myself from my patients because if I don't, you're facing parents coming at you, the system coming at you. You're in a country where you love but don't love you back. I'm a black female. You know, so educated black females are automatically a threat. And white skin and green eyes, that's another threat. So I don't because it made me a strong person, but I am human. But I've had to learn how to detach from my patients where she is in a situation where she wants to help. I'm in a situation where I can't help for my own legal reasons. So I empathize and I do sympathize with her because I understand how she feels. But I can't do that. I have to detach myself and say, okay, you save the ones you can, and you leave the ones that you can't. You know, so I understand what she's going through. We're in the same thing, just we have to handle it differently.
Absolutely. My question is, these people that said they don't want you to ignore the situation, you know, all these other kind of things. What would happen when they have to go through something like that in their family? Would you want to ignore that?
Nope.
And that's a big thing right now. Is a part of my job is changing the culture behind how we view these violence. We still live in a culture where the majority of people would like to believe it doesn't happen in my neighborhood. It doesn't happen in my schools. It happens in these places that I don't like, but not here. When in reality, this happens by everyone, to everyone, everywhere. It's a non-discriminatory crime. And where there are humans and the ability to communicate, there's the ability to cause this harm. And so it's also breaking through that westernized culture of, like you were saying, you have to get past the me factor. How either I make this relatable to you or I make you understand there's more than yourself. And both are an incredibly difficult challenge in a grown adult that has already been set in their ways. So it's trying to get them involved, trying to show the facts.
We had, I was having a conversation, I'm just telling you a little story I had. I was having a conversation with a young man, he's in his 30s, and me and another person, and we were talking about him going to court to defend, he was in the school system, to go in the court and defend another student that was being sexually abused in the home. And he said he would do everything, he must have knew or there was some things that he knew that he could, you know, testify against the situation. And while he was speaking to us, he didn't say why he was so adamant about going, but all of a sudden he went into some trance and started reliving what happened to him when he, obviously I figured it all out. Somebody taking care of the uncle in the home. you know, they're trusting him, you know, with the uncle. The uncle was the worst thing that happened to him. By the grace of God, he was able to overcome all that. But, you know, you still don't know what could happen. All that they're never ever will ever forget. And there's always a repercussion, and it can come and you don't even know it's going to come to you. You know, so that's a lot of things that I think people need to sit down and look at. You know, counseling is a good thing to have. You know, having somebody like my sister's talking about, a mentor. Having somebody that you can talk to these things about, that you can confide in, and not have it everywhere. So that's another reason why people don't want to say anything. They don't want somebody to stereotype them.
Absolutely.
You know, and not just them, but stereotype the family. And don't stereotype the whole entire family because of what the incident they went through.
Absolutely.
So, and my other thing is, in the Akron public schools, I know at one time we wanted to at least do an awareness about domestic violence, and especially for this month. At least put it on the calendar. But then I was told that they are making awareness for sexual violence or sexual assault, I believe, sometime in April. But is there anybody have you guys reached out, or have they reached out to Hope and Healing for, at least for information, or something that they can take back to the parents, something they could leave in the counselor's office, and you know, you don't have to say anything, but at least you know the information is available.
So, in my final notes of me chatting, to answer that, there is nothing mandating us to come in terms of conversations on domestic violence, sexual violence, or anything like that. There is the existence of Aaron's Law, which does have schools have to have their teachers trained by either a attorney, prosecutor, or law enforcement officer, and their students can be trained by anybody as long as they're training on the age-appropriate content. However, there's no follow-up, there's no enforcement, no schools are being forced to do those things at this time, and there's no funding to make those things happen. So what I tell a lot of people is we do free presentations. We have so much availability, and I have an entire team that's available that if somebody would like us to come out